Welcome to the Caretakers, a show where we'll talk about what it means to be a caretaker on Earth. Whether we're intentional about it or not, we're all caretakers. We've been entrusted to take care of our family, our friends, our environment, and ourselves. We'll talk about strategies for taking care of yourself, mentally, physically, and spiritually. We'll talk about what it means to take care of others, from your neighbor across the street to the neighbor across the globe. This is going to be a journey of self-discovery and reflection, and we hope you join us as we strive to be the best caretakers we can be. Welcome to the Caretakers Podcast. I'm joined today with Robert Dufour, who is the leader of the Convert Wellness Caravan and has an online channel called Islam for Europeans. I'm excited for Robert to join us today because we're going to be talking a little bit about his background and about what we can do to make people feel comfortable in a new setting. So, Robert, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Basil. Just one caveat: I'm actually not the leader of the Convert Wellness Caravan, so the sisters do most of the work. So
that's typically how it goes, and then the men step in and take the credit.
That's exactly it. Yeah. You can edit that out if you want.
We'll give them their due credit. Okay, so I want to get started with a little bit about your background. So your story. Specifically in your childhood, let's get started there and sort of how you grew up and how that made you who you are today.
Yeah, so my father is French Canadian from Ontario, from a small French community next to Windsor called River Canard, and he met my mother in the United States. My mom is American, half Polish, half Armenian. Actually at a disco at a 4th of July get-together. Okay. So they met there, just by chance, not by chance, by the will of Allah. They ended up getting married. My mom moved to the town where my dad lived, which is called Amherstburg, which is a beautiful town 30 minutes south of Windsor. They got a house there. And they had me and then my brother. So we grew up in this small town in southwestern Ontario. They were Catholic, so we went to me and my brother went both to a Catholic grade school and a Catholic high school. And it was both the town and the high school were like 95% European Canadian, and same thing with the schools as well. So.
Right. And in that time when you were growing up, what did you hear about Islam, if anything?
Close to nothing, up until maybe high school. I think in grade school I had like a Muslim substitute teacher, and then I made some off-color comment about his beard. I knew nothing about Islam. Okay. So I guess he became very upset, and I ended up in detention. And then, you could just tell that he was really upset, at the end, and I just had no idea what he was talking about. I had no idea why he was upset. So that's kind of an aside. But I didn't really know anything about Islam until high school, when we had to take religion class in Catholic school, and in grade 10 we had to go on a field trip. So we went to different religious buildings of other faiths. So we went to a Hindu temple, we went to an Orthodox church. And at the end of the day, we went to Dominion Mosque, the mosque, the big mosque in Windsor. It was, I remember, going to that mosque and was pretty fascinated and the involvement of the prayer. I would see the men and their kids praying, and just the involvement that was, needed was just I was just kind of fascinated by it. I wanted to ask, do you guys believe in a day of judgment? I don't know why. I just never, summed up the courage to ask that. So, that was the only real exposure I had to Islam up until after I graduated high school. So.
Got you. And growing up, were you naturally curious? I know we talked about a little bit in the car on the way over here about your dad being in stand-up, and you sort of had that comedic background a little bit. Was it?
Well, I mean, yeah, my dad, as you know, my dad is a stand-up comedian. He's a great man. He's very funny. He's a local celebrity. And he, the thing about it is that, growing up, his friends and I guess, it was kind of like a lot of camaraderie. It was like a brotherhood between comedians. Mm-hmm. So, they would go to each other's houses. They would have barbecues together. My parents ran the comedy club in Windsor for several years, and they had good friendships with the comedians who were in Detroit. So I was raised in a comedy family. One thing it does is that it kind of skews your sense of humor, because comedians, they don't laugh at things that everybody else laughs at, but they laugh at things that nobody laughs at. So because they have a very warped sense of humor. And the whole thing about comedy is that comedy, stand-up comedy in particular, has always been about subversively getting a political or social message across. You can look at comedians like George Carlin or like Lenny Bruce. Even though like he was very funny and at times off color, they always had a way to get like a social message across to the people. And my dad was very well knowledgeable, and he always said he always told me always try to read between the lines, and always read and educate yourself. So I guess I kind of took that when I started my journey into Islam. So
yeah, and we've seen a recent example of that. It's like Bassem Youssef, for example, in his commentary on what's going on in Gaza. He's been great at tying that comedy and sending that message at the same time. So it's nice to see a recent example of that. Mm-hmm. And so you visit the mosque in high school, mm-hmm. and then when did you start thinking about actually studying Islam?
Well, again, I started working at a pizza place. I didn't have much direction in my life. I did not end up going to college or university right out of high school. I was living with my parents. I had no direction in life, no real job skills. I wasn't even physically strong to have like a construction job. So my first, I guess, kind of real job was like working at a pizza place. And the pizza place was run by Turks. Okay. But, they were very, even though they weren't practicing Muslims, they were still, very generous. I learned a lot about Turkish culture. And they had one friend who was, a practicing Muslim. I remember, during Ramadan, he would come by and they would make him iftar. So that was a bit of exposure to Islam. I also watched the movie Malcolm X, which when I first watched it, I didn't really think about it that much. But, after I watched it a second time, when he went to Hajj and, saw the different people, praying to the same God, I think, that resonated with me a lot. But what really, sparked my interest in learning more about Islam was, the unfortunate events of 9/11, like many other people who ended up converting to Islam afterwards. Right. That was a major event. I mean, it was all over the news. It was everywhere. People were very angry at Muslims, Islam, the Muslim world. I remember even in bars, they would put Osama bin Laden urinal cakes in the bathrooms. It was really, quite a crazy time. And, that kind of sparked my interest in learning about Islam because, I don't want to get into too much detail, but you start to realize, with, American foreign policy, why are we going into this country now? And bombing the people in the smithereens, why the rhetoric about this? And then, Islam was big in the news because of this. Even with all that happened at the time, George W. Bush said that Islam is a religion of peace. So, you kind of want, and I was a very inquisitive person myself. I was big on conspiracy theories. I would go on the internet and, look up, did the moon landings really happen? So that kind of sparked my interest to actually, eventually type up ISLAM late at night on the internet. And that, started my journey. The first website I went to about Islam had a picture of an unborn baby in the mother's womb. And I'm just like, what does this have to do with Islam? And, this website talked about, how the Quran contains information that we only know with the technology of the 20th century, like the development of the baby and unborn baby in the mother's womb, and how the mountains are like pegs, and, how the seas have different levels of waves and darknesses. And I was floored because, growing up in high school, in Catholic school, the whole thing is you can never prove God exists. The Bible, we don't know who wrote it. All the different translations, there's no way you can actually prove, God's existence. Mm-hmm. Or the movie Contact is another example with Jodie Foster. The whole bit about it is, they get this alien message, and there's all this question about theology and stuff. And in the movie, she's an atheist, and I need proof, and I need proof that God exists. Well, here we have this document that we know is at least 1,400 years old. We can carbon date it. You can go to a museum and see the same Quran that we have here up on the bookshelf. And, how did Muhammad, peace be upon him, know all this stuff? How did he know all these scientific facts? How did we know about this historical facts that came to pass after he died? How we know all this stuff about Egyptology that nobody knew at that time, that they only know, once Egyptologists uncovered all these information about, the Egyptian dynasties. Impossible, so that sparked my interest into Islam. And that's why I started reading more and more and more. And I made it like an independent study. I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't even tell my bosses who were Muslim. I studied it on my own without telling anyone for like a period of like 7-8 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's, subhanAllah, it's always something that I think about, that in the periods where Islam is being scrutinized, especially in the media, that a lot of people have a similar story to yours, where it forces them to look into Islam for themselves and figure out, what is it that these people believe and why do they believe it. And one of the examples that I can think of recently was, there's a girl on Instagram, her name is Megan Rice, and after what was happening in Gaza, she started looking into Islam herself, and it's been like a total perspective shift for her, and she's inspired a lot of people to do the same. And so, subhanAllah, when you look at things like that, that even in the times of the most turmoil for the Muslim community, there is benefit in that people like yourself start looking into it and then join us eventually.
Yeah, even in the first Gulf War, I think like 3,000 U.S. soldiers ended up converting to Islam. Wow. So yeah, I mean, they plan, and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. So, and
I'm sure there were challenges when you first converted. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're talking about this because I have no problem giving my conversion story, and it helps motivate the Muslim community. But there's many challenges associated with converting to Islam, and I want to preface this by saying that I was one of the ones to be blessed to have a family that had no problem with my conversion to Islam. And that kind of facilitates these converts who ended up becoming successful and integrated members of the Muslim community. But the challenges I particularly faced, I mean, even with the support of your family, you still are fasting during Ramadan, which you've never done before, which is a major challenge. And that was back when Ramadan was in November, and I thought it was difficult. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult it was for people when Ramadan was in July and August. Right. Just things as things as simple that we don't think about now that we're Muslim for many years, but just basic things think about not passing gas so you don't have to make wudu again. No one, when you're not Muslim, you don't even think about that, Right. This means absolutely nothing to you. It carries no valence. Right. But now all of a sudden you have to think about this, Right. So I know it's kind of a banal example, but yeah, I mean, fasting during Ramadan was difficult. I had a tremendous appetite. I think learning. I mean, these are challenges, but again, when you are growing up in a cultural sphere that has no problem with the fact that your family is okay with you being Muslim, and your by extension your friends, there's still challenges involved. You still basically are the only Muslim in your household, so almost all of these converts, when Ramadan's going to come along, the mosque is going to be, very friendly to them and try to be very accommodating. But at the end of the day, they're going to be eating suhoor all by themselves. And, you wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, tiptoeing around your parents' house, trying not to wake them up, eating, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right. It's super dark outside, you're the only one, that's a very lonely time, right? So I mean, but again, like I said, we'll get more into this later, there's a lot of converts where their family is completely opposed to their conversions, and once you're in an environment like that, those are super challenges that I think mosques really aren't designed for, unfortunately. Right.
So for people that are listening to this that maybe are thinking of converting or have converted and are sort of going through that struggle, what kind of programs are available, or what have you been involved in to help people who convert? overcome those challenges?
Well, like I guess we'll roll it back a lot. Like when I first converted, the mosque did try to establish programs that helped out these converts, but which I think are important pieces of the puzzle. Mainly it was teaching them about Islam. Teaching about the ins and outs of the religion. What are the do's? What are the don'ts? Learning Arabic. Learning how to read the Quran. Those are all important pieces of the puzzle, but I don't think it's the only pieces. I mean, there's several other parts that are still missing. For years, like I've been, to cities across Canada, it's kind of the same story. I mean, a lot of mosques don't even have programs for converts. It's just like they convert to Islam and they join whatever existing programs exist in an existing mosque that Boer Muslims are involved in. So you're basically teaching graduate school level courses to preschoolers, really. But what we're trying to do, and like I said, we're part of the Convert Wellness Caravan, is that we're taking an integrated approach that looks at all the problems that new converts are going to face, when they do convert to Islam. And education is important, socialization with other Muslims is important, but I think more importantly, you don't want them to be the only Muslim in their cultural sphere when they leave the mosque, because as the one hadith, the lone wolf the lone sheep gets eaten up by the wolf. You can't, these converts need to collectivize in some way in order to be able to survive in these environs.
Right.
So.
And that's something that is not limited to converts as well. I mean, obviously it's
Absolutely.
exasperated, but I mean, even growing up Muslim, not having a friend group around me that was on the same path and thinking about the same kind of things would have made things so much more difficult. Right? You mentioned some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are organizations that exist in Canada that are designed to help Muslims from different communities, integrate. Like you have the Syrian Canadian Association. I had the pleasure of going to their Eid prayer in Mississauga a couple of years ago. But there's an organization that's designed for, recent Syrians to Canada to help them get integrated. So, whether that's translation services or, learning English or learning how to get your G2 or make your way around things you need to do in Canada, to get, documents and everything. These are important dunya related matters, worldly related matters that need addressing. Like I said, religious instruction is important. It's necessary. It's essential. But it's not the only thing.
Right.
So.
And you wrote about this recently. I read something that you wrote about having programs specific for converts and how there's potentially some opposition to that in the sense of, well, everybody should just integrate into one Muslim community. But your opinion is that these programs that are specific to certain groups are important and can still work within the fabric of a Muslim community.
Yeah, I think, when you get people who take their Shahada, like you said, with what's happening in Gaza, starting last October, you have many people taking their Shahada. A thin slice of those converts are going to hit the ground running and become these successful integrated members of the Muslim community. They might get an advanced level of Islamic scholarship. They may marry into a Muslim family. They may dress differently. They may learn Arabic. They may, do hijrah to the Muslim world. All that is great for them, right? But very, very few people are going to be able to do that, right? And the vast majority of converts are just absolutely starting out. And there are things we don't even realize. Even now, myself as a convert of many years, that converts. It's not the things that mosques do are just not really designed for converts. And if you try to change the way existing programs do in mosques to try to accommodate them, it's not going to work. I'll just give you one small example. There's an imam that I spoke with recently, and he said that, and I agree with him on this, and that a lot of kids who grow up in Arab households, they're losing their Arabic. And that loss of Arabic is coupled with a loss of Islam. They're not connected to Islam. That's why when you go to mosque now, you hear people speaking Arabic, an older uncle to a young child, to move their coat or whatever and things like that. Well, for converts, they don't understand any Arabic. And, one might say, okay, let's be more accommodating in our classes and whatnot. But if you do that, then if you just speak English the whole time, then these kids are going to lose their Arabic. So it's not congruent. You need other classes where, like you're just starting from ground zero. Like these people have no knowledge of Arabic, no knowledge of the Quran, and no one ever spoke Arabic to them in their household. Right. So there's no they don't even, even if a child who's born into an Arab family who doesn't practice at all, they still hear Arabic around the house. So when they hear certain words being said, they understand what it means.
Right.
But you have these people who have no experience with Arabic whatsoever. They're just starting from scratch. So you need, for example, Quran programs that just teach Alif Ba. I mean, that's where you're starting. Mm-hmm. And you need people who went through that as well. Old converts who have created all these mnemonic devices in their heads to remember all these things as they're learning. So
right. And do you think there's a distinction between the Arabic language is extremely important in the religion, in order to read the Quran, but Arabic culture, and as a convert trying to adopt Arabic culture, do you think that's needed? The way it's something to me that is
yeah, you're LARPing. I see. Yeah, they call it LARPing. So I know that
Can you define that just for people listening?
So yeah, for the Gen Z crowd and the Alpha Gen, they know what I mean. So LARP is an acronym meaning live action role playing.
Okay.
So people, what they would do is they would dress up in outfits. Say for example, there's a Lord of the Rings concert or something, or some type of medieval times thing. People would dress up in medieval outfits and go there. So
right.
You basically LARP as a different character from a different time. That's what LARPing is. So
right.
It's taken on this negative connotation. So I know in the past, a lot of converts, they would do this, okay, you're Muslim now, let's give you your new uniform, let's give them the gutra, the shalwar kameez, and, to integrate them into the Muslim community. And that's fine if that's what they want to do, more power to them. But it's not a requirement to become a Muslim.
Right.
And a lot of these converts, they still have to live within their own communities. And telling them that they converted to Islam is such an enormous leap as it is. Right. If you put more on their plate where they change everything about them, their right. accent, how they dress, that's not Islamically required.
Right.
You're just giving them way too much. So I think what we've been trying to do is that for recent converts who come from backgrounds whose people don't have experience with Islam, who've never had a population that's converted to Islam, we're trying to integrate things that are Islamically acceptable from their culture into this new program, the new programs we're designing. So, for example, we might have an iftar where it's all Mexican food. We have converts, from Latino, Hispanic descent, but by and large, there's no real large group of, Hispanic people who converted to Islam, aside from Andalus. But that's how you can integrate the culture of the people into that. So they feel that they're a part of it, right? Because that's great that you have, Arabic food for iftar. That's great that you have Pakistani food for iftar. I love biryani.
Right.
But for the masajid that serve biryani, they're not going to change. They're not going to suddenly go, okay, we have 2-3 converts now. Now we're all going to make hot dogs, halal hot dogs and hamburgers. We're not asking them to do that. But if that's the case, keep the biryani, have it for your iftars. But we are going to create our own iftars. Right. You're more than welcome to come. Have some mashed potatoes, have some coleslaw, have some Italian food, right. Jamaican food, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's important. I mean, you want these converts to feel like their culture is a part of Islam too.
Right.
And I think that's one thing that a lot of Muslim communities in the West have, or just the non-Muslim countries in general, have failed to do. So you need to integrate the cuisine, the dress, the architecture, as long as it's in line with the Sharia, to make the non-Muslim populations realize that Islam is for all cultures.
Right. And that's part of what you've been talking about on your channel, Islam for Europeans.
Yeah.
Right. So can you tell me a little bit about why you started making that content?
Yeah. So, it was 2017. I noticed there were all these gaps. I noticed that, I went back to do my master's degree, that, and you know this very well, that the Muslim youth are torn right now between the MSAs, having a foundation in traditional Islam, having a religious Islamic identity, following the Prophet steps of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And you have the other crowd that, they feel more marginalized in the West, so they may join more like secular leftist groups, right? So there was I remember doing my master's degree, and there was this big disconnect between the two. There's a lot of, Muslim youth that feel marginalized by the West. They feel that we're a minority group, and, we're being oppressed, by the white majority. And, we need to create as much solidarity as possible with other minority groups, even if those minority groups are completely opposed to our faith, because, we're being threatened. And a lot of this was big in 2016 when Trump, was facing off against Hillary Clinton. But, the question is, where does the Indo-European Muslim fit in? The whole thing that Muslim, and I'm not trying to bash, these marginalized Muslim youth. I'm trying to reach out to them. But I remember they had a lot of anger, the fact that, why are we establishing dialogue with people who hate us? Basically use the terms white or the West interchangeably with non-Muslim or Islam hater, or use it as antonyms with Muslims, which really is really horrible for dawah.
Right.
So that was another gap. And then just in general, just as I talked before, all converts feel that they're caught between two worlds. And, I created, this channel to talk about these issues. And not just because, it's about converts, it's about the Muslim community as a whole. I want Islam to be successful in the West. I don't want hijabi sisters to feel marginalized or attacked for being visibly Muslim on the street. But in order to do that, you need to make Islam feel like it's applicable to all cultures. So that's many of the reasons. A lot of the issues that we talk about are all related to this. So.
Right. And you and I think, were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and you were mentioning that you think the perception of Islam in the West has improved.
Yes.
And why do you think that?
So I know that sounds counterintuitive. Especially in the last couple of years, there's been an uptick in Islamophobic incidents. So you have these two things that are happening simultaneously. One is that the extreme anti-Islam faction, they're becoming more galvanized, and there's more anger on that extreme level. But when you look at the moderates in between, I think the image of Islam has actually become more positive. For many reasons. One, you have Muslims taking a stand against certain agendas that we don't agree with, that other people in the West don't agree with either. And there's just wow, we thought Muslims had nothing to offer the West and society, but here they are taking the charge for things that we find important. So that has been resulted in a major improvement, even though it's not really visible. You don't see this stuff on legacy media. You don't see this stuff even on social media. But me, my entire family, my community is non-Muslim. They see this, that it has improved. And just also people converting to Islam who already have a huge voice on social media. Say what you will about Andrew Tate, whether your opinions about him are positive or negative, but the fact of the matter is, he is an enormous, huge figure who converted to Islam, and people in that arena, are learning more about it, and it's becoming more acceptable. So I think for those reasons and more, I think that there's been an increase in positive attitudes towards Islam, and also just in general, the West has been, not just the West, but non-Muslim countries in general. They're finding that, liberalism is not really solving all the problems. It's just exponentially created more problems, because you can say what you want about, modernity and free speech and everything, but, now there's just no objective reality anymore. And, there's been an increase in atheism and drug use and alcohol use and, homelessness, all, breakdown of the family, all these things that, just have contributed, to, the West becoming more and more degenerate. So I think for those reasons and more, I think Islam as a whole, on the whole, there's far more positive attitudes about it compared to say 2003. So
Right. I think one of the big things as well has been the rise, as funny as it sounds, of MMA.
yeah,
And having fighters like Habib and like Islam Makhachev, and people are seeing, like even you have Joe Rogan, for example, commenting on about his podcast about how disciplined these guys are, and so people see that and they see that strength, and it just reminds you of that fact that to have an impact, it's good to be a strong Muslim, and it's good to be somebody who is confident in what you do and do really well in your profession, and that gets noticed by people, and especially that discipline aspect.
It all goes back to, I think, a major part of, people live in different cultural spheres, whether that's based on nationality, shared language, culture, and, also just organizations that people belong to. You take a look at sports leagues, the more Islamic presence there is in that particular sphere, in this case, MMA, it creates this kind of domino effect. So A, people are more interested in Islam to begin with. And B, if they think about converting to Islam, they know that there's going to be other MMA fighters that will support them, right? So they're going, for some of these people, they're major celebrities, there may be large fallout. Maybe they'll lose, some celebrity endorsement. But at the same time, they know that there's going to be other Muslims in that cultural sphere that's going to back them up. As much as, the Tablighi Jamaat and all these Islamic organizations do great work within their own sphere, Tablighi Jamaat's not going to hang out in an MMA environment. It's just, it's just not their thing.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it goes back to that, I wrote an article about this called Challenging the Medina Model. The Medina model is basically, we look to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and how he reformed Medina. You had the Sahaba there, and, when someone converted to Islam, you had so many other Sahaba there ready to help them out. You had a whole system in place. But Medina was a single town in the middle of a desert. Everybody lived in the same cultural sphere, right? So you can't simply copy and paste what they did in Medina to a giant metropolis like Toronto or MMA, where you have multiple cultures living in multiple spheres, right? So that's why you need to take this approach to say, look, people belong to these different spheres. You don't need to have one homogenous blob of a Muslim community. You need to be able to delegate things and let people, establish Islam within their own spheres. So that way, you build this, sub-community from the ground up. So.
Right. So we've talked quite a bit about converts and what they need to be doing and thinking about. I want to flip the script a little bit and talk about the existing Muslim community and what we can do to support people who have taken their Shahada. And so starting with leadership of masajid, and we'll go through different groups, but starting with the leadership, what do you think they can do to support people?
Well, you have to look, I'm going to use an example here that kind of parallel to what we're talking about. If you think of a local integrated health network or a LIN, so a local integrated health network, let's take, for example, the City of London here. You have all sorts of different types of medical professionals. You have your general practitioner, you have your dentist, you have your orthodontist, you have your drug rehab clinic, gynecologist, all these different, medical professionals, right? The imam is kind of like the general practitioner, right? He has a lot of Islamic knowledge, more so than us converts, right? You go to your GP and you have a corn on your foot. He might say, okay, here's some medication, and then he'll sign off on it. You go to the pharmacist, you pick up medication for the corn on your foot, right? Let's say you go to your doctor, your GP, and you have gangrene on your foot. He'll say, okay, we need to refer you to a podiatrist or a dermatologist, right? So it's all about delegation of tasks. You might have converts that have a very specific fiqh question. Even us converts, we're not qualified for that. Or even us, people in the Muslim community who have no Islamic education, sometimes they give advice like this, and it could be a complete disaster. Right? They may end up on the street because of their advice. If you go to an imam who has done their Islamic education, who understands that there is things like fatwa khas, where you have Muslims in specific situations, that's where, we refer the convert to the imam for that,
Right.
And, with us, at the Convert Wellness Caravan, there's going to be many situations that, are designed for our problems. How do you take someone who knows absolutely no knowledge of Arabic and help them, learn Arabic? How do you help them deal with being the only Muslim and they're living with their Muslim family, and like you say one wrong thing and the next thing you know they're out on the street. Like what kind of advice can we give them? We've been through those experiences. We've seen those, firsthand. So I think first and foremost, it's all about, you have to delegate tasks to people who are most in tune for it. And I think with Islamic leadership, the imam needs to be there when it comes to like really important religious questions. But at the same time, the imam can only do so much. They're incredibly busy to begin with. Many of them have full-time jobs. They do a lot. It may take weeks to be able to talk to an imam. So, like imam can say, look, like, like you have your own cultural sphere as a convert. Here's the number, and the email address of, the convert group that runs here, maybe they can help you, with getting acclimated on a social level. Right. So that I think is important for Islamic leadership. But
and I wanted to ask you, because I do think that we oftentimes rely on the mosque leadership to take care of everything. And I think it's something that we need to move away from as a community. Yeah. And so I want to ask you, as regular attendees of programs at the masjid, or you're coming for Jum'ah, or you are coming for a daily prayer, what can those people do to support converts?
A lot that they're doing already. Like, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Like, right. Usually when the convert comes in, people are very happy to see them. They'll shake their hand, they'll give them a hug, they'll say, how are you doing? Those are all good things. It's good to know that, that people see you there and you're supported. But some people aren't about that lifestyle. Some people, they don't want to be seen as like, the local celebrity, because that could be kind of like weird and alienating too. We don't want to like put them up on a pedestal either. So I think, converts having their own wolf pack, like you go to a mosque, you see that Somalis have their own sub-community. Like the Palestinians have their own sub-community, Pakistanis have their own sub-community, but they all exist under the greater umbrella of Islam. I think converts need that as well. We need a wolf pack. So there's no need for this kind of like convert pedestalism, where this guy is going to be like the savior and save the Muslim community when he doesn't know all these differences that exist within the Muslim community himself, right? So I think saying hello, saying salam alaikum, asking how you're doing, those are all really good things. Inviting us to iftar at your house, those are cool things as well. I mean, those are all, even a small gift to give to us on Eid prayer, those are good things as well. But like I said, people are busy. The imam is busy. Everyone's got full-time jobs. And when we go to Eid prayer, it's incredibly lonely because we all see all these, Muslim families and they're, with their Muslim sons and daughters and, wives and husbands and cousins and uncles. And, we are here by our lonesome, like we don't have that, sub-community with us. Right. So it can be a very, alienating experience. So, but what I'm saying is that, don't feel bad about that. That's cool. That's awesome that you have all these advantages of being, being from a more born Muslim family, which comes with its own challenges. But don't give up on that. Don't try to dissolve your family just to make us feel more integrated. Right. I think that's the approach. So I guess in summation, keep doing what you're doing. Always, say salam to us. Treat us like just a regular member of the Muslim community. But a lot of these things, just I guess beyond the scope of many, Muslim communities, and in conversely to take care of these issues themselves. Right.
And if you're watching this episode looking for a takeaway, I think that's a takeaway that people can take home and work on and try to do in the future.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, just so people understand as well. I mean, we mentioned it in passing a few times, but if you could get a little bit more specific about what are some of the common challenges that people are facing after they take their shahada now. And I know we talked about the systems of how to support them, but just so people understand what challenges are out there.
I think, number one is having to mitigate the relationship with your non-Muslim family and community. Okay. That is enormous. I think Islamic organizations, including the converts themselves, have sort of, I guess, not really focused on that. And I think a lot of it is, in social science, we call this survivorship bias. So, the converts who hit the ground running, who become like superstars, like your Yusuf Estises and your Abdul Hakim Quicks, and they like already had a supportive environment to begin with. So this sort of like facilitated their conversion and helped them become like major superstars and do all the things that like these celebrity converts end up doing. The vast majority of people who take their shahada, they're not in those situations. They're going to have to deal with family on a constant basis. All the people within their cultural sphere are going to have varying attitudes on Islam. Some are going to be very positive about their conversion. Some are going to be very negative. Some are not going to care whatsoever, and everywhere in between. You have to manage all those relationships. And, with your work environment, you can't ask these converts to leave those spheres and, come into a Muslim community and, that's already incredibly busy and already, like running on shoestring budgets to begin with. So that's number one. Definitely dealing with your non-Muslim family and community as, a new Muslim. Number two, a very steep learning curve. So, I think for people, when you look at born Muslim communities, you have a wide range of religiosity levels, as you know.
Right.
Some are very practicing, they're heavily involved in Islamic organizations. Some are practicing, but they're turned off by the masjid or organizations. They just pray on their own. Some are semi-practicing, they may not pray at all, but they fast during Ramadan and they go to Taraweeh and they go to Eid prayer. Some are just barely hanging on by a thread, and others are just, they just identify as Muslim, and some have just completely rejected Islam, right? I think with people who new Muslims you also see that range, but you only see the, the one or two converts that have, dove into an existing Muslim community. Right. And, I think we place the bar very high to converts and, we inundate them with all the do's and don'ts of Islam. And, a lot of the times they just get so overwhelmed by it that they'll do such and such sin, or they'll fall back into sin. Maybe they were drinking beforehand, or maybe they were involved in illicit relationships beforehand. They do that and they feel so much shame that they don't want to go back to the Muslim community. They can't show their face because they feel like they've let them down. So I think that's the wrong approach. I think first and foremost, you need to teach them about, the attributes of Allah and, the level of forgiveness of Allah. And then once that's inculcated in them, then you start teaching them the ahkam, very slowly. And I think, steep learning curve is definitely number two. And three is just, just continuing, month after month, year after year. It's a marathon. It doesn't happen overnight. And, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to stumble down. So I think maintaining that over a large period of time, is going to be really important. So I think those are the major things. And, all the stuff I talked about fasting during Ramadan, like praying 5 times a day. Those are challenges that all Muslims face. I think for converts, though, that's kind of also very unique because you're in a mostly non-Muslim sphere. So how do you pray when everyone in your family is non-Muslim? If they look at you praying, just they think you belong in an insane asylum. Right. What the heck are you doing? So, you need to develop life hacks on how to pray. Sometimes it's about taking a pair of jeans when you're in the mall and say, hey, I want to try these on, and then praying, in the change room. And I think another major part for sisters is wearing the hijab, because now you're visibly Muslim. Right. And a lot of families are completely opposed to that because they're all right with their son, their daughter converting to Islam, but they may not be all right with now it's out in the open for everyone to see. So that a lot of these Muslim women just aren't really prepared for that. And that's an incredibly major thing as well. So,
right.
Yeah.
And so when people are listening to this, it'll probably be about a week before Ramadan starts this year. Mm-hmm. And I want you, if you can, think back to your first Ramadan.
Wow, my first Ramadan. So yeah, it was in October, I think it was. Okay. So, the days were short, but like I said, I wasn't used to fasting. So for me, it was difficult. I was living with my parents. I was working at the pizza place. So, I would grab all this food and put it in a bag because, during my pizza shift, that was when Maghrib happened. Right. So I could have been on the road delivering a pizza when Maghrib started. Right. Or, it could be...
You can't eat their pizza.
Exactly.
You can't eat the pizza you're delivering.
Yeah. That would give me a lot of trouble. And they serve... they serve pork, too, so that's not going to work, eh? So, but that, again, I was one of the, I want to say lucky ones, but Allah blessed me with the, being in an environment that, facilitated my conversion. So even though my bosses weren't practicing, they were Muslim. They supported the fact that I converted to Islam. So they would make iftar for me and stuff. But a lot of people aren't in that situation. So for me, like, yeah, it was tricky. I made it through. I remember in Amherstburg where I lived, there were very few Muslims, right? So I would have to go to Windsor, which is a 30-minute drive, to be in a Muslim environment, right? So I would go to the mosque, drive 30 minutes, be with the Muslim community, maybe eat iftar, maybe stay overnight in the masjid in the last 10 nights. But at the end of the day, I had to drive back, to my family in a totally non-Muslim environment. So it was almost like, how do I put this? Going into like a cryogenic chamber on Mercury.
Right.
You get frozen and then you have to walk out, on like this extremely hot temperature. So like you try to get as much, exposure in a Muslim environment as you can, because you're going to have to live in your non-Muslim environment eventually.
Right.
So it was tricky, but alhamdulillah, I made it through. And I made a lot of friendships along the way. So
right.
Yeah.
And so your advice then to somebody who this is their first Ramadan, or either as a Muslim or they're Muslim and they haven't fasted previous Ramadans and this is the year they're going to give it a shot and go for it.
Wake up for suhoor. I mean, that's it's very difficult. It's not easy,
Right.
but the blessing in suhoor is enormous, and it helps you start your day. I was so obsessed with eating that like if I missed a day of suhoor, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to survive.
Right.
I can't do this.
Right.
Right. So now I set like 4 alarms on my clock, so I never ever miss suhoor.
Right.
So I think that's important, even if it's something small. Because like you're following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and you're gonna feel strong during the daytime. It's not gonna feel like an uphill battle doing this. So
Right.
yeah, and try to be involved with the Muslim community. Like I say, we run the Convert Wellness Caravan. We try to integrate with have converts form this wolf pack, but that doesn't mean we don't want to expand out and meet other people in the Muslim community. I think that you asked what can born Muslims do? I think that's important. Like we still need to interact with one another. I think that's we don't want to isolate ourselves. So yeah, I think that's important. And reading as much Quran as you can. Reconnecting with the Quran. So.
Right. And I want to give people an opportunity, if they are interested in joining the Convert Wellness Caravan, if they're interested in reaching out to you to ask you questions,
Yeah.
how can they find you? How can they reach out to you?
We have a Facebook group. Reach out to us on London, Ontario Muslims, and we also have. I'll give you our email address, so you can leave it in the description.
Put it up on the screen.
Yeah, put it up on the screen so people can find out more. We have a WhatsApp group and everything. So we're around. Like we have a lot of social media stuff. So we're always looking for volunteers. We're looking for people to give converts rides because a lot of them don't have cars. People who want to help us, set up, things and whatnot. They definitely want to get involved there. We'll definitely welcome them with that. So.
Okay, awesome. Is there anything else that you didn't talk about today that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I think overall, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a leaner model, and by taking this approach, it's not just focus on converts, but the health of the Muslim community in general.
Right.
Just look at it. I'll just give you an example. Let's say you have 10, 20, 30 people take their shahada, right? And without addressing their needs of being the only Muslim in their household, and the only Muslim in their workplace, or their entire cultural sphere. That's like I said, it's a tightrope, and we don't want these people to get kicked out by their families, because then the financial burden that ends up on the Muslim community. And with the rent prices as they are right now, that's a lot of money. And we don't want the Muslim community to spend all this money on converts. A lot of these solutions we're proposing would mean that we wouldn't have to spend all this money. We're going to be self-sustaining. So I think overall, and again, it's all about showing people that Islam is adaptable to all cultures. And I think once you do that, then Islam will be seen as more of a positive influence in the West, and adaptable for all peoples, because people, they don't really feel like they're connected to anything anymore. They feel that like we live in this like, globalized world where there's no connection to like your traditional culture and things like that. And, for people who already come from born Muslim societies, they have this connection with Islam to their cultures. They cultivated Islam for centuries. Their ancestors were Muslim and things like that. Whether that's Pakistan or the Arab world or Somalia, and we think that's a good thing. Like, don't give up on that. We don't want you to give up on your traditional culture. But if that's the case, then, like the converts themselves need to take this approach as well. Because like, that's going to create an environment, like the MMA approach, where you already have Muslims, people taking their Shahada within that cultural sphere, and they're already visibly Muslim. So there's already people, when they take their Shahada, then there's people to like, be able to catch them when they fall. So.
Right. I think that's a great place to end. I think we've covered a lot of things in this episode that, as caretakers, we want to be able to have tangible things that you can go out and do and support people. And so I think we've covered that quite a bit. So thank you for joining us. And it's been a pleasure, and you're welcome anytime. Yeah.
And one last thing, like, again, there's going to be detractors. There's always going to be people who disagree with this kind of approach, right? Whether that comes from like, Muslims who want to take the more monocultural approach, like we're all one Muslim ummah, we're all one family. Let's be totally united. Let's just get rid of the idea of, culture altogether. Or people who might be on like the political, Muslims who might consider themselves on like the political left. I mean, like, like we're willing to establish discourse with discussion with Muslims of all walks of life on this. At the end of the day, we care about the health of the Muslim community in general. So, I mean, that's my message. I'm always welcome. We're always welcome to talk to people. So
that's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you so much, Basil. Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
All right.